And I know recreation and sports has been a big part of your life, and I know you played football in school back in the day, and you had an interesting story about football and as you were losing vision. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah. Man, you're really going in for the deep cuts tonight, Joe. You got the you got the Russell Schaefer bio out, and you highlighted some lines. So, um, that's I feel like if anybody's ever seen Married with Children, and Al Bundy's character played by Ed O'Neill, like him reliving his high school football glory days. But as I'd mentioned earlier, I was diagnosed with RP when I was 10, and one of the first symptoms of the condition was night blindness. And so, as an aside, that made dating as a teenager a little bit challenging. It's like, let's go play putt golf or go to a matinee movie and then Taco Bell. And let me make sure I have you home before the sun goes down. But it also made things a little interesting, like you said, playing varsity sports, particularly, football, as you start getting, Friday night lights, and deeper into the season when, it was nice early in the season when, half to three-quarters of the game was still played in daylight, but then, once you start getting, into October, and you're kicking off in the dark, it was something else. And so there were a number of times where, I would, I'd lose the ball on the lights, or, something like that would happen, and you just kind of roll with it. But there was one instance in particular. It was the first game of the season, my junior year of high school, and it was on a I was playing cornerback. It was a defensive pass route. I was covering a guy, and he went out, and the ball was thrown his way, and I was breaking on the ball, and I lost the ball in the lights. He caught it, put a move on me, and I whiffed, and he went on and scored a touchdown. The fact of the matter is we lost that game 48-3, so that was not by any means the contributing factor to us losing. But I felt awful. My coach pulled me, and I was on the bench the rest of the game, and he reamed me out, and he knew that I had RP, and I think, quite honestly, he went a little bit hard on me. I even heard him say to our quarterback, who I'd grown up with, and like, don't throw the ball to Schaefer anymore, because I just don't know if he can do what he needs to do. Just use him as a decoy, and that just deflated me, and I got in the car that night after the game, and I told my dad, I don't know that I want to do this anymore. And so my dad said, it's your decision, but he may or may not have gone into the school and reamed my coach out that night. My memory's a little hazy there. You got to go with yes, because my dad had a fiery temper. But I just didn't go to practice. That following week for a couple of days. And my teammates were like, hey, I was like, I'm not feeling well. And I just kind of pushed it off. And a couple of days before the next game, I told my dad, I'm like, I don't want to go out like that. I don't want that to be, the end of my athletic career. I don't want to be a quitter. I know this isn't easy. I don't know how it's going to work out, but I don't want to stop playing. And he said, that's your choice, Russell. You do what you want to do, what you think is right. And so I went back to the team, practiced for a day or two, and following Friday, literally the week after I got benched, following Friday night, this time I'm on offense. We're on the 20-yard line. And again, we lost the previous game 48-3. So, the headline here is we weren't very good. But I go out for a pass, and I'm, running downfield, and I look back, and as usual, our quarterback is scrambling for his life. He's got 2 or 3 guys, coming after him, and I'm probably 20 yards downfield, and I see him just like reach back and uncork one, and it's coming right my way. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, here we go. And so I'm watching the ball, I'm watching it, through the lights, traveling my way, and I'm watching it, and, I'm not losing it. And, next thing I know, it's landing in my hands, and I'm turning, without a second's notice, I'm turning and I'm sprinting down the field, putting separation between me and the defensive back. And next thing I know, I'm getting dogpiled in the end zone after scoring an 80-yard touchdown, the longest touchdown pass in the history of my high school, a week after I, walked away thinking I was never going to play again because, I couldn't see in the dark, and, my coach didn't have confidence in me. I think the lesson there is that, people are in a position to make decisions about the opportunities that you get, but nobody is in a position to decide the opportunities that you decide to pursue. And I can tell you with 100% confidence, I never would have caught that touchdown pass if I would have quit the team. But, I went back to the team not knowing if I would stand on the sidelines and never see the field ever again. But I knew that if I didn't go back, that there was no chance. And so, I think for me, the life lesson was, things aren't going to go exactly how you plan. And, you're going to have highs and you're going to have lows. But if you take yourself out of the game, then you're never going to have the opportunity to experience anything but just sitting on the sideline, watching life and everything else pass you by. And for me, that's not the way I wanted things to go.
That is beautiful and awesome. I love it. I love that story. It gives me chills. And people are always going to try to decide what you can and can't do. And I think you learned that in a very specific way. And I love that story. So, and I know, so you still stay active. Do you still do some kind of physical activity or recreation or work out at all?
I do, yeah. And it's something that, again, it was kind of one of those things that it took a little bit of time and a little bit of, to get around. I was always a big bat and ball sports type of guy, football, basketball, baseball, and the like. And so, when I lost my vision, I kind of lost a little bit of my gumption or desire to be active. And so I wasn't for a while, and I got really out of shape. And so, it's probably been about a year and a half or so ago, my wife's coaching, she actually called, she made the call for me, which, any good partner sometimes, will give you the tough love of, making the call that you need to make, but you're not willing to make. She called a personal trainer and set up an appointment for me and had him come to the house and kind of meet with me. And so I've been working with him for a year and a half now. And I was always really nervous about working out with a trainer, going to a gym, eyes on me, things like that, feeling a little bit self-conscious. I don't really like a lot of attention. And, I was a little skeptical. A blind guy in the gym, working out with a trainer. I just didn't know that I was down for that. But, I found a trainer that comes to the house. I work out with him 4 or 5 days a week. And he's great. We have a great rapport. And I think, much like that, that mentorship type of relationship, not only is he training me, but he's learning a lot about how to work with somebody with a disability. Or, he's told me multiple times that just for his, clients who can see, or for his clients who don't have a disability, he's become a much better trainer for them because of the way in which he has to explain the exercises or the movements, for me to be able to get them. And so, it's been mutually beneficial for us. And, it's really helped me, feel like, getting that physical activity side back, that health, that endurance, and I don't know that I'll ever go run a marathon or anything, but just being active every day, helps me, feel good, feel better about my physical appearance, as well as just, keeping me mentally sharp. I think it helps me, do my job more effectively because I feel like I have more energy and more stamina. I think that's one of the big things here for people with disabilities, particularly vision loss, is it can be so easy to, become, sidelined physically. But it can be done. Find those ways that you can, stay active, get in the game. Certainly there are, some really great, athletes and people who do extreme things, like Eric Wadenmeyer, who, Joe, you and I know, who climbed Mount Everest and other things, while being blind. I don't know that I'll sign up for that, today, but, I will get up at 5 a.m. tomorrow and work out with my trainer, and that's good enough for me.
That's awesome. And I agree with you. When you work out, you just feel better, and there is some like hesitation at first until you realize getting back into it. So I think that helps a lot, especially, after losing your vision and such. So thank you for sharing that, and I appreciate it. So one more question for you. When your parents, when you were leaving home at whatever point, whether for school or for employment, moving away, were they encouraging to your independence? What was that like?
Yeah, they were. Like I said, coming out of, going to college, I lived at home the first 3.5 semesters of my college experience. I did things completely backwards. I've always been a little non-conventional, and, march to the beat of my own drum, kind of do things, in my own way. While everybody was looking to move off campus as a senior, I decided, I don't want to leave college without, having the experience of living in a dorm. So I actually moved into the dorms and lived on campus the spring semester of my senior year of college. And that was a great experience. That was the first time that I really, quote unquote, lived away from home. And then that summer after graduation, I lived in a house off campus while I finished up some summer classes and did an internship. And that was a life lesson as well. But after graduation, like I said, 9/11 happened. I just couldn't afford to live on my own, move back home. And so it wasn't until a year or so later, I took a job. I grew up in, Northeast Ohio, just south of Cleveland. And I took a job in Columbus, Ohio, about 2 hours away, from where I grew up. And it took a lot of, conversations with my parents, in terms of, just helping convince them of, that I would be safe, that, I wouldn't do anything foolish, kind of being on my own. Down there, this was before Uber or rideshare and stuff like that, but I also didn't have that security blanket of my dad. If I found myself out somewhere after dark, in terms of, being able to, have that ride home. But, fortunately, I went to work somewhere where I knew someone, they knew about my vision loss, and I found a good network and community. And I think this gets back to just that, that being open, being vulnerable. As I shared about my experiences, I was able to, create a community of people who, were really good friends, but they also had my back. And I knew that if I, found myself out, if I got stuck in traffic, trying to, beat sundown home, that, if I had to pull off the side of the road and call somebody, they'd come pick me up and, get me home, and we'd go get in my car the next day. But it was definitely an experience, and I think it takes a lot more planning, and it takes a lot more intentionality. Moving out on your own, when you're young for the first time, is hard and daunting in and of itself, and it's especially hard for somebody who has vision loss. But it can be done, and sometimes the hardest obstacle sometimes is getting over, parents, who you just want the best for you and are overprotective, maybe, sure, but they don't want you to get hurt emotionally or physically, and they want you to be successful. And so, realizing where they're coming from, and now that I'm a parent myself, I have a much greater appreciation for where, my parents were coming from, 20 years ago. Just have those honest conversations with them and be willing to work through the hard stuff. Don't get frustrated, hang in there, and try to work through it. And certainly, people like Joe, you and I are, examples of the fact that it can be done. But, you've got to put the planning in. And I think if you've got somebody who, is a little bit hesitant, come with a plan and say to you, this is how I'm going to do it. And if you don't know how to do it, then, reach out to people like Joe, or to me. Find us on social media, find somebody in your own community that who, has a similar background or circumstance to you, and ask them how they did it. But the key is to not doubt yourself, to be confident, to take things step by step, start small, like I did, going to live in the dorms was a great first step, living in a house, in the summer, with a group of other college guys was a great first step, and then, I went back home, kind of, got myself, financially stable, and then I was able to move out, go get my own first apartment, when I was, 23, years old. And so, enjoy it, embrace the experience. It's a rite of passage for every young person. And it's an experience that every person deserves the opportunity to make their own, including people with disabilities, people who are blind and low vision.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I really appreciate you and so much in the messaging that you're providing to all these, whether it's parents and families, whether it's students, whether it's job seekers who are blind or low vision, and the professionals who work with them. If you had to provide some last advice or some kind of lesson that you want to provide to some students out there in the world, or parents and families, what would be your last message to them?
Yeah, so, I think we've talked a lot about vision loss. Obviously, that's what, that's the common thread there that ties everybody, together in some way, shape, or form, most likely that's going to be watching this. And so, that's, when I talk about being a person with a disability, obviously I'm talking about my vision loss. But I think the other thing to bear in mind is that, particularly for people who lose their vision progressively, Joe, like you or I, there's so much more that goes along with that. And I often tell people, especially, as I said before, I thought I was going to go blind in my 40s or 50s. I was legally blind, by my late 20s and had little to no usable vision left by my early 30s. That was hard. So I often tell people the most disabling thing that ever happened to me was not losing the ability to see. It's what losing the ability to see did to me emotionally and psychologically. And all these things that we talked about, Joe, throughout this conversation, assistive technology, orientation and mobility skills like cane, a good support system, all of those things are critical and essential, but ultimately are completely useless if you do not have the will and the desire to get out of bed and face the world and face the day. And honestly, that was me for a while. I knew I was going to go blind one day. I just wasn't ready to go blind when I did. There were things that I wanted to do with vision. There were things that I wanted to see. I was a pretty new father when my vision really started to crater. My daughter is 12. She'll be 13 in about 5 months. Some of the last, things that I remember seeing, some of the, images that are etched in my mind are my daughter when she was about 18 months old. That's the last things that I remember seeing with my daughter nearly 12 years ago. And that was incredibly hard emotionally. That's not that's not when I wanted to lose my vision. And that's not how I wanted it to happen. I became deeply depressed, and I really was kind of adrift and listless for a while. I didn't, know if I was going to be able to continue to work. I didn't know if I was going to be able to be a good dad. I didn't really know, honestly, if I wanted to, carry on, if I'm being honest. And I had to talk to someone. I had to seek counseling. I had to take care of my mental health. And I had to, focus on that and focus on getting well emotionally so that I could take advantage of all of the things that could help me manage my blindness and my vision loss. But, absent of addressing the mental health side that came with my vision loss, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now, Joe. I certainly don't think that I would have the job that I have right now, or have, achieved, some of the milestones in my career that I did. And so, mental health is so critical. And so that's the thing that I would leave people with, is that you've got to focus on the whole person, not just the vision loss or the things that go with it, but, what's going on below the surface, what's going on relationally, what's going on emotionally. Because ultimately, in order to be our best selves, we've got to be our whole selves. And that means taking care of, our spiritual health, as well as our mental and emotional and relational health, as well as the physical side of things.
Russell, that's great messaging. I know counseling, and I'm pretty open about it, changed my life, when I was 19 and lost most of my vision, and really changed my perspective on life. And I was in a dark place, like you're saying as well. So knowing that it's okay to go to counseling or psychologist or whatever, just getting help, and it's not one size fits all either on a counselor. So that's a whole different topic, but I love that you brought it up, because it is about the whole person. So thank you for coming to spend time with us and sharing the whole person, the whole Russell. I'm going to call this the whole Russell. So, thank you, Russell Schaefer of Walmart, for sharing about your life, your employment, your education, and so much more. So I appreciate you as a person, but I also appreciate you as a friend, and thank you.
The feeling is mutual, Joe, and goes both ways. Thank you for always being a great friend, a great champion, an advocate, not only of people with disabilities and people who are blind, but of me. I'm just so grateful to have you in my life, and I appreciate having this opportunity to visit with you, and hopefully this conversation is beneficial to somebody out there watching. The last thing I'll say is that if I can be of greater service beyond this, don't hesitate, to reach out. Find me on LinkedIn. Find me on Twitter at Russell Schaefer. I'm always happy to talk and do whatever I can to help somebody along.
Thank you, Russell. So you can find more content like this on the American Printing House for the Blind's websites through their Connect Center, APH Connect Center, and you can find at aphcareerconnect.org or familyconnect.org, VisionAware. You can find all these websites and find information about adjustment to vision loss, blindness, employment, information for parents and families, and much, much more. So thank you for listening to our session, and check out our other pieces in the future.